Welcome to Atheist Talk, produced by Minnesota Atheists. Minnesota Atheists practices positive, friendly neighborhood atheism in order to provide a community for atheists, educate the public about atheism, and promote separation of church and state. We offer free literature and speakers about atheism to the public, including a free sample newsletter. Our contact information will appear during and at the end of this program, so we hope that if you like what you see, you'll consider becoming a member of Minnesota Atheists. Remember, if you're interested in us, we're interested in you. With me today is Cynthia Egley, President of Minnesota Atheists. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you, August.
In late 2004, the Dover Area School Board in Pennsylvania announced that beginning in January 2005, ninth grade science students would be read a statement casting doubt on evolution and promoting intelligent design. The school policy was immediately challenged by a group of Dover teachers and parents, and in a decision issued on December 20th, 2005, Judge John E. Jones III ruled that intelligent design could not be taught in science classes. In this program, we'll examine that ruling. Cynthia, perhaps you could read for us the policy statement that was passed by the Dover Area School Board.
Thank you, August. This statement was to be read to the ninth grade students in their biology class at the beginning of the time when they started to teach evolution in that class. And the statement is, the Pennsylvania academic standards require students to learn about Darwin's theory of evolution and eventually to take a standardized test of which evolution is a part. Because Darwin's theory is a theory, it continues to be tested as new evidence is discovered. The theory is not a fact. Gaps in the theory exist for which there is no evidence. A theory is defined as a well-tested explanation of the origin of life that differs, as a well-tested explanation that unifies a broad range of observations. Intelligent design is an explanation of the origin of life that differs from Darwin's view. The reference book of Pandas and People is available for students who might be interested in gaining an understanding of what intelligent design actually involves. With respect to any theory, students are encouraged to keep an open mind. The school leaves the discussion of the origins of life to individual students and their families. As a standards-driven district, class instruction focuses upon preparing students to achieve proficiency on standards-based assessments. So that was the statement that they had to read.
Okay. Now, when a judge evaluates this kind of case, and it was challenged on separation of church and state grounds, one important thing is to look at the history of the policy. What led up to its passing? Did it have secular roots, which it is supposed to have, or did it have religious roots? What can you tell us about that?
Well, certainly the defendants claimed that it had a secular purpose and secular roots. However, going back to January 2002, the board members who pushed through this policy had indicated to the other members of the board on a number of occasions that they wanted to bring creationism and school prayer back into the schools. It was very important to them. They thought that creationism belonged in biology class alongside evolution. So they had said that a number of times at a number of different meetings, and they spoke to the teachers about teaching evolution, and they told them that they were concerned about that, indicated that they were concerned, especially about the theory of evolution in terms of macroevolution and speciation, which are kind of key things in creationism that, oh yeah, sure, microevolution happens, but macroevolution from one species to another is not acceptable to creationists. So they arranged a meeting with the teachers, and this is in 2003.
Okay.
So they were talking about this well before this, and they had quite a bit of discussion on that, and it affected immediately how the biology teachers taught evolution.
Mm-hmm.
They started to be much more timid about it. They didn't want to be pushing it too hard because they were afraid for their jobs. They stopped using a Discovery Channel evolution video, for example, that had been used as a helpful teaching device. They had always kept a mural in the hallway, or they created one each year and put it in the hallway of the Tree of Life in the evolutionary process, and they stopped doing that. In fact, it turned out later on that there had been a mural on the wall in one of the schoolrooms or hallways that in 2002, I believe, was torn down by someone on, I think the janitorial staff tore it down, and later on one of the primary movers of this whole policy commented that he enjoyed watching it burn. So we see that this man had a very strong feeling very early on that he wanted to actually remove evolution and replace it with creationism.
I also recall reading that in the decision that the biology teachers wanted to purchase new textbooks, and they were being held hostage by the school board. They wouldn't allow them to buy these really great textbooks on evolution unless they acquiesced to some of the creationist demands.
Well, they needed new textbooks, and they needed new textbooks, and they were looking at the 2002 textbook. And the members of the board who didn't like this policy actually had looked at that textbook and really were unhappy with it because it had evolution in it. So they were trying to avoid buying them, and as it happens, they delayed it so long that the 2004 edition came out. And so then the teachers started trying to push, we need to approve these books and get them purchased. But the board kept delaying it. It kept not putting it on the agenda repeatedly, just wasn't on the agenda. And so teachers had to bring it up at the board meeting to say, well, we need to handle this thing about the books. Around that time, the man who was pushing this had contacted the Discovery Institute, which is a creationist group, to get information for how to make all this happen that he wanted to do. And he pretended he didn't know any of this stuff early on, that he didn't know ID was a religious kind of thing, and yet he was talking very early on to the organizations that are very much religious that have been putting this forward for quite a while. So they did not approve the biology textbook, and the board continued to look in this and, in fact, spoke about the importance of teaching creationism and started looking around all these other organizations and came across the book called Of Pandas and People, which is a creationist book. The history of that book shows that not so long ago it spoke of creationism, it spoke of God, it spoke of a creator, all of these kinds of things. And that after the decision was handed down that said that you could not teach creation in schools, they suddenly edited the book. And all references to creationism, Genesis, and creator, those words were taken out and replaced with design and designer. So it's actually the same book, just a simple replacement of words. So that book he found, and he decided he preferred that book. He tried to get them to use that book. Then he tried to get them to use both books. At one point in a board meeting, he said, "I challenge you to trace your roots to the monkey you came from." While growing up, his generation read from the Bible and prayed during school. And he said liberals in black robes were taking away the rights of Christians. And he said words to the effect of, 2,000 years ago, someone died on a cross. Can't someone take a stand for him? These do seem religious statements. So they had curriculum meetings. They talked about balanced presentations, which they claimed meant that you would have to talk about intelligent design. And it just went on and on. I mean, we're getting into July 2004, and he learned about this textbook, the Of Pandas and People, and he wanted to get them to buy it, but the teachers didn't want to. So when they got the new edition of the biology textbook and had to go over that one again in order to go back and do the decision whether they wanted to approve it or not, he tried to put the Of Pandas and People next to it, and he tried to tell the teachers, well, we'll buy the biology textbook if you also buy the Pandas and People textbook. So he conditioned it on that. Well, the teachers wouldn't accept that, but they finally negotiated because they had to have their textbooks, and this had been pushed for so long they were really in a bad spot. So they had to have them, so they said, okay, we will allow the Of Pandas and People book to be in the classroom, and that they would do some kind of small mention of it or something. And it was fairly limited, but it was used later on by the defendants to claim that the teachers supported this, and they had never willingly agreed to
Right,
this.
they're basically being blackmailed.
They were being blackmailed.
Yeah.
In August of 2004, their lawyer warned them that the group that they were working with, the lawyers that they were working with to put this intelligent design in, and the intelligent design itself was a creationist program, and that this has been ruled illegal, and that he was very concerned about the schools doing this because he felt that it was going to lead to a lot of trouble and a lot of expense. But they ignored that. So that was when they also forced their text on them. And then they decided, since people didn't want to buy that book, that they had to have some. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, there was a contribution of 60 copies of Pandas and People. Now, in the early depositions and discovery phase, apparently, of this trial, the board members who were responsible for this, primarily responsible for this, claimed that they didn't know where that donation came from. However, it came out later in the course of the trial that the board member, who was the lead in all of this, had actually gone to his church and spoken to the church members, and requested donations for the purpose of buying these books, got that money, wrote a check from his checkbook to his father, and his father wrote a check which he used to pay for the purchase of these books, which were then donated to the school. So this was an outright lie, that he didn't know where the money came from or where the books came from. And this is both of the two people who pushed this were totally aware of this. So then they decided in October of 2004 to have the curriculum change, and they pushed that through in October. And one of the early interesting things about this was curriculum change is usually done over the course of a year. It's introduced, it's reviewed by the state curriculum board and people, and they talk to all the experts in the field. They go through a whole process to decide what the curriculum change is going to be. Well, this curriculum change came up in a matter of a month. It was on the agenda and was passed
in the middle of the school year, too.
in the middle of the school year. Yeah, that's right. So there were no standard procedures followed to do this. It was very, very hasty. It was kind of a surprise for the science teachers and everybody that they did this, though. You know, they knew that this was brewing, or this kind of thing was brewing, but they actually went in and passed this.
Some of the teachers didn't even find out until they read it in the newspaper.
Right. And most of the parents didn't know until they read about this in the newspaper. But once it hit the newspaper, even from early on, there was a lot of conversation in the news, a lot of articles in the newspaper and conversation in the community about this whole problem. So it had history, and it was all discussed in the letters to the editor and everything else as a religious issue.
Exactly. That's one thing the judge pointed out, that there were over 200 letters to the editor, and in all the discussion, it was clear that this was a religious issue.
In the minds of everybody.
Of everybody, of the community.
For or against,
right.
They all spoke of it in religious terms. So again, the leaders of the school board claimed early on in this case that they had no knowledge of this being a religious thing. It was a matter of expanding the science, making a better science program, and that it was a purely secular concept, and yet there's no way they could not have known that this was religious. So after they put that in, they decided that they would need to have a statement to read to the students because they still had the biology book and everything. And so that's the statement that I read to you, which when you break it down is really interesting in how it tells students that evolution is only important to learn because you have to pass the test. And that it's really wrong. And of course, when it's said in that context, and that none of the other science classes have to have this, it makes it very clear there's something wrong or different about evolution.
I think that was pointed out by the judge, that there's no disclaimer for any other subject. You know, plate tectonic theory is only a theory, and they're all, nothing.
Right.
Evolution is singled out.
Yeah, the Wedge document that the Creation Research Institute, I believe, put together specifies that they want to avoid getting into the young Earth stuff for now. They want to work on intelligent design and get that as a wedge into the schools first to try to change science into Christian
Well,
science.
they want to change the definition of science to include supernatural causes.
Exactly. They want to have science which is Christian.
Mhm.
So they also talk about gaps and everything else. Well, they wanted the teachers to read this to their students, and the teachers were very upset about this. The students were told they could opt out of listening to the disclaimer, which is an interesting thing. But the teachers decided they wanted to opt out. So they did a memo that said, "You have indicated that students may opt out of this portion of the class and that they will be excused and monitored by an administrator. We respectfully exercise our right to opt out of the statement portion of the class. We will relinquish the classroom to an administrator and we will monitor our own students. This request is based on our considered opinion that reading the statement violates our responsibilities as professional educators as set forth in the Code of Professional Practice and Conduct for Educators." So they really, the teachers were totally unwilling to read this. So eventually what had to happen is the administrators had to go in and read this statement to the students, which also made it clear that there's a big deal around this. It wasn't normal. And it even included a statement they shouldn't talk to their teachers about the origins of life, like there's something wrong with their teachers in terms of discussing that subject. And then they published a newsletter and sent it to everybody in the community on this, which got everybody in the community involved.
Now, in passing this school policy, the school board members didn't consult the science teachers. They didn't,
Well, actually they did, and they ignored what they said.
Oh, they ignored what they said. Okay.
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
That's incorrect. But they admitted in their testimony that they really didn't understand what intelligent design was, and yet, these are the school board members, and yet
The other ones. Yeah.
they didn't seek out the advice of the American Association for the Advancement of Science or the National Academy of Sciences or any other group.
The Association of Biology Teachers or Science
right.
Teachers and things like that, because there are several groups like this that they could have gone to learn it. The two men who were running this thing had a sense of what it was, but the rest of the board members who voted for it weren't really sure. One of them called it intelligence design rather than intelligent design, and she ended up voting for it because they called her an atheist if she didn't. Yes. I'm sure in their community that would be a terrible thing. Well, one of the things, the effects of this on people was really bad. And one of the things that happens when you inject religion into schools, into public activities, we have a quote from one of the plaintiffs in the area. He said, "Well, it's driven a wedge where there hasn't been a wedge before. People are afraid to talk to people for fear, and that's what happened to me. They're afraid to talk to me because I'm on the wrong side of the fence." So this had an immediate impact on people.
And in fact, two of the people testifying on the side of evolution are religious. John Haught is a theologian, and Ken Miller is also a Catholic. So there is no divide, like evolution is atheist and, ID is Christian. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a false dichotomy.
It definitely, the judge made it clear that that was one of the issues, is that they set the two up, that if evolution is not true, then intelligent design must be. That evolution is, like you say, purely atheist. Only an atheist would believe in it, and it destroys all religion. And so if you are at all religious, if you're a Christian, if you're not evil, then you have to support intelligent design. It's a very inaccurate dichotomy, because in science, a new theory has to cover all the same material that the existing theory it replaces covers. It has to explain all of that and more. Well, intelligent design explains a great deal less than the existing theory of evolution. So even if evolution failed and one had to replace it, intelligent design is not what would replace it.
In the trial, it actually came out that there's a lot of evidence for evolution, that the intelligent design critique of evolution is wrong, that the flaws that they claim are there aren't there, and that intelligent design is trying to win by default.
Right.
That if evolution's not true, then we're automatically true.
Right.
And then when the court tried to look at a positive case for intelligent design. There wasn't any. There's no experiment you can do. There's no evidence.
There's no papers. No one has made an hypothesis based on it and then tested it to see if it came out true. Nothing, no kind of scientific work of any kind has been done associated with it. I hate it when I forget what I was going to say, but the science, they're assuming that if you prove that anything is not explained by evolution, then the entire theory topples. Well, that's not true.
Yeah.
All of science has to work on its best theory and then fill in the holes. And in fact, a good theory gives you an idea of what holes there are and what you need to fill in and how you need to research them.
What I liked in the case was that at the very beginning of the decision, the judge gave a little history of the creationist movement. And he said it started in the 1920s with fundamentalists wanting to prohibit the teaching of evolution. Just, you couldn't even teach evolution. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court threw that out in 1968. So then their next strategy was to require balanced treatment, that, okay, if you're going to teach evolution, you also have to teach biblical creationism. Well, that was thrown out by the Supreme Court in 1987. So they went from balanced treatment then to, they kept religion, but they removed the references to the Bible. And they added language of science. And so then you got creation science, but they didn't say Genesis and they didn't say the Bible. Creation science, scientific creationism. That was thrown out in 1987. So the latest evolution of the creationist movement is removing all references to God and religion and using the language of science and calling it intelligent design. So it was very interesting how the judge had traced this, and he wasn't fooled anywhere along the line, and nobody else should
No one else
either.
has been in the legal cases that are precedents for this. The interesting thing, too, is that it's an example of evolution, the way this approach has changed over time. It has adapted to the fact this won't work, so we'll do this. That won't work, so we'll do that. It's exactly how evolution works. But, of course, that's probably not what they think.
Yeah. The judge concluded that intelligent design fails on 3 different levels. Intelligent design violates the centuries-old ground rules of science by invoking and permitting supernatural causation. The argument of irreducible complexity, central to intelligent design, employs the same flawed and illogical contrived dualism that doomed creation science in the 1980s, the dualism that it's either evolution or we win by default. And the third failure is that intelligent design's negative attacks on evolution have been refuted by the scientific community.
In fact, the same books and the same reasons are being used now as they were with creationism for why it has to be creationism rather than evolution, and yet many of those exact areas have been studied further in the years since creation science was so popular and are now fully understood and are no longer gaps, if you could call them gaps at all, and yet they're still quoting the same gaps in these books in intelligent
things
design.
like the evolution of the bacteria flagella, that little tail that whips around, and the blood clotting mechanisms.
The blood clotting cascade.
These were actually discussed in the trial.
Right.
And the scientific evidence for their evolution has been presented.
They had a paleontologist at the trial who actually presented evidence of the evolution and fossil that you see in the fossils that we find. And there are complete sequences of fossils that show speciation from land animals to whales, for example. So the claims that there are no records of this are completely false. They're just simply lies.
And of course intelligent design tries to overlook the fact that something that evolved for one purpose can be used for another purpose, like the jawbone ends up becoming part of the ear later on. And that's the case with the flagella. It was originally connected with secretion.
Right.
And then became
a completely different thing.
Right.
A secretory mechanism which suddenly became useful in a different way.
Well, the judge had some just devastating closing words in his opinion. He said the citizens of the Dover area were poorly served by the members of the board who voted for the intelligent design policy. It is ironic that several of these individuals who so staunchly and proudly touted their religious convictions in public would time and again lie to cover their tracks and disguise the real purpose behind the ID policy. The breathtaking inanity of the board's decision is evident when considered against the factual backdrop that has now been fully revealed through this trial. The students, parents, and teachers of the Dover Area School District deserved better than to be dragged into this legal maelstrom with its resulting utter waste of monetary and personal resources. So
That's a strong statement. I get the impression from some of the things the judge said that he's actually a religious man himself.
Oh, he is, and he was appointed by a Republican president.
And he comments in the case that he says people are undoubtedly going to accuse this as the result of an activist judge, but his decisions are right from preceding case law. He really doesn't have a choice in this matter. There's no activism going on here at all.
Exactly. Time and again, he cites the precedents, the Supreme Court decisions that he's relying on to come to these conclusions.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's not...
Well, this has even touched us here a little bit in Minnesota. The Minnetonka School Board was considering whether to water down its teaching on evolution. Unfortunately, it failed on a 4-2 vote.
Well, one of the things you pointed out, too, is that the board was essentially replaced. The members who were opposed to this policy change actually resigned from the board, some of them with very strong statements.
This is
about
the Dover School Board.
The Dover School Board, about how painful it was that they were sidelined, ignored. They were asked about whether they were born again or not, and they didn't think it was anybody's business at the school or on the board what their religion was or how seriously they took it. That was just not part of the job, and that they were really sad that it had come to that. So they resigned. But after this happened, the citizens of the school district tossed them all out and brought in a board.
In November of 2004, there was an election, and 8 of the school board members who supported this ID were up for re-election. There was one that wasn't. And like you say, all 8 were tossed out in favor of a new board that supported science. And in fact, just a couple days ago, here, early January 2006, this new board has canceled that intelligent design policy. So things are back to normal. Science has prevailed.
Science is being taught as science.
Yeah.
Yep.
But we have to be ever vigilant.
We do, because this kind of thing will happen if you're not paying attention.
And I'm starting to wonder now how the creationist movement's going to evolve from here. I mean, they've really...
What are they going to call it next?
They stripped out all reference to God and religion on the face of it, even though it's still there. What more can they do? Okay,
This is true.
Thank you for joining us for Atheist Talk. If you'd like more information about Minnesota Atheists, including a free sample newsletter, feel free to contact us at the phone number or email listed at the end of this program. Thank you once again.